morning, everyone, and a special welcome if you're here for the first time. So this is the last talk on the Praying Like Jesus Did series, because next week, as you know, is Vision Sunday. So it's based on the Jesus' Sermon on the Mount in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6. And I must confess that I couldn't practice this aspect of prayer during this last month, because I was on holiday, and we are going to talk about fasting. And how can you fast when you are on holiday? Yeah, you can, but yeah, you know, yeah. But I can talk by experience, and I have how to prove it, okay? A little story. In the 90s, I was a young lad on fire for God. I was in the middle of a period of fasting, and I went to a sleepover in a friend's house. Next day, he offered me a lift in his not brand new, but he purchased a combi van. And there we went in the morning. Remember, I was fasting, and then in the middle of the way, it stopped. I didn't know how to drive. And he's this tall. He said, "Can you go and push it so it can start again?" I said, "Okay." Well, when I started pushing it, it was a little bit of downhill, you know. So I went and started pushing it. After a while, it didn't start. And then he had to take a turn, and the hill stopped. Now it was not a hill anymore, and I'm still pushing it, and it's not starting. And then suddenly, I think he saw from the mirror that I was struggling. And then he said, let's swap. Now I'm going just to park the van. And if that's okay, you just, steer it and we can park. I said, okay. So the only thing that I remember is sitting down. Then I blanked out. Next thing I remember, I am rushed through the hospital in his arms. I fainted. And then talking to the doctor said, what happened? And then he discovered that I was fasting. And then he said, "You should never fast." And the proof is the next picture. That was me. That's the proof that I was fasting. I was very skinny. And then he said, with this physique, you cannot fast. Of course, I didn't take his advice, and fasting became a great experience throughout my journey with Christ. And it's amazing to see and to feel what it can do for you. And fasting is, first of all, is the absence of food in your diet. No food at all for a long period of time. I know that long is kind of controversial. You know, for some people, 2 hours is enough, is long enough without food. But I'm talking about many more hours into that. But it's a spiritual discipline that can help you a lot. So I would like to give you a recommendation if you want to know more about fasting, because in this talk, just some aspects will be dealt with. So Richard Foster is the next slide, has this little book called Celebration of Discipline. And one of the chapters is about fasting. It's a quite good book. I would recommend you to read if you want to go more into that, and I hope you will. In the biblical concept of fasting, there is always a reason for that. It's not only a spiritual practice, because sometimes it can start as a spiritual practice and become just a ritual without meaning. So in the biblical concept of fasting, there is always a reason for that. A pressing, an urgency about fasting. People fasted for different reasons. When you go to the Bible, you're going to see that. Sometimes as a sign of humility, sometimes as a sign of repentance, sometimes seeking for answers. just being penitent, and so on and so forth. It's incredible, but sometimes people can fast in the wrong way as well, for the wrong reasons. For example, there is a group that vowed to fast until they could kill the Apostle Paul. Well, or they died by hunger, or they had to give up their vow because they couldn't kill Paul. But today we are not going to explore the historical development of fasting. We are going to focus on Jesus' talk on the Sermon on the Mount, is the text that we are reading through, and see what he is teaching, because it is really in the middle of his teaching about prayer. So let's read the text in Matthew 6, chapter 6, verses 16 to 18. If you have your Bible with you or your gadget, open up and we're going to read. It's going to show in the screen as well. It says, "When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." Now, what is Jesus teaching us about fasting? First of all, that fasting is part of our devotion. Jesus expects us to fast. Have you noticed that he doesn't say if you fast, he says when you fast. If it was a conditional in the life of a Jew or a disciple, he would say if you fast. But no, he's assuming that we will fast. He's saying when you fast. So it's a normal part of a devotion to God, to fast. And Richard Foster, in his book, he argues that one of the supporting ideas to understand that it is part of our devotion, it's because the text of fasting is the right context about prayer and giving. So let's see what he says of the implications of being a right context in prayer and giving. He says, "It is as if there is an almost unconscious assumption that giving, praying, and fasting are all part of Christian devotion. We have no reason to exclude fasting from the teaching than we do giving or praying." So that means if we consider praying and giving as part of our devotion, it means that fasting must occupy the same position. So I went to a conference about more than 20 years ago in Nottingham. And a guy called Dan Sutherland, he said something that was quite interesting. He was studying why is Christianism declining, especially in Europe and the United States. And it's increasing in Africa and Latin America. And he found out when he looked into the devotion, like what do they do that we don't do? He found that the only thing missing was fasting. Of course, he's talking generally. There are churches and ministries that emphasize fasting as well. But as a general thing about the Christian culture and Christian devotion, that was missing in both Europe and the USA. And he pointed out that was one of the main reasons for the decline of Christianity. Well, of course, there are other things playing into that as well. There are lots of things playing into that. But I believe that he is right, as is one of the, as we already argued, fasting is part of Christian devotion. And Jesus expects us to be part of our devotion as well. Now, of of course, it's not only that. Jesus also is teaching that fasting is not for the social media. Now, can you imagine how controversial it would be in your Instagram account, you picturing an empty plate and saying, I'm fasting? That would be something to see, isn't it? Or not. But, we think that this show-off type of behavior is something new. No, it's not. Jesus is saying that in his time, there was already people who would do things just to show off. But also, I understand that Jesus is fighting a type of bad spirituality. Some people would use fasting or any other type of spiritual discipline for their selfish motives. So, Jesus is saying that the ones that do it for show, they are practicing a bad kind of spirituality. And I named 3 things that can characterize a bad type of spirituality. First of all, it makes you feel superior. I'm more spiritual than the others because I'm fasting. The other thing is they do that to attract admiration and respect from others. There are places where this becomes a culture. Oh, he's fasting. He's so holy. He's so up there because he does that. 40 days. And with that, there's another one, which is to gain status and therefore influence. And with influence comes manipulation. So I've seen all sorts of stuff about that. So I can tell you, Jesus is saying that fasting is not for that. Fasting is not for that. And then it comes the third point that I understand Jesus' teaching, that fasting is for God's eyes. It's not to show to other people, but it is for God's eyes. Jesus is encouraging a healthy kind of spirituality. And the healthy kind of spirituality is about relationship with God. It's not about what other people can see or performance. It is about your relationship with God. And for that, you're going to see that Jesus, in one sense, he is highlighting that it is a personal act of devotion. In verse 17, he says, make your fasting obvious only to your Father. That's kind of interesting. How can you make something obvious to the one who sees everything? So, in one sense, I believe that he is kind of making a contrast. Instead of doing this for other people to see, you do this because God can see. It is secret from the eyes of others, but is revealed to God. So in that sense, it's a personal act of devotion. But also, he is indicating that it is an act of faith. Because right after, in the same verse, it says that God who is unseen, actually is the following verse. It says, who is unseen? God who is unseen. Now, to have a relationship with one that you don't see is an act of faith. When you pray, which is a kind of conversation, you're talking to someone that you cannot see. You can only do that by faith. The same thing about fasting. When you do it to the one that you cannot see. So it is an act of faith. It means that when I engage in fasting, it must be also an act of faith. And the third thing that Jesus is indicating is that in terms of the good and healthy spirituality, that God knows the heart. Because he says, and the one who sees, again, is another type of contrast. God cannot be seen, but he sees everything. We cannot see God, but God can see us in the ways that nobody can. So in that sense, my devotion is not only my act of devotion, but also the intention of my devotion. God can see my heart and the desire of my heart. God can see the motive, the reasons behind my actions. And that is essential for us to keep a healthy spirituality, is to engage with God knowing that, first of all, it's personal, but also is an act of faith, but it is also knowing that he sees us, he knows us. I don't know about you, but that always gets me, fired up. That the God of the universe knows me. The God who created the universe, that the universe cannot contain. He's outside the universe, outside time, outside existence. He notices me. He knows me. He sees me. But now, following that understanding, Jesus also says that there is a reward. Now, this is kind of controversial. And I'll say why. Because I've heard it in the past and some people encourage that you must fast in order to receive something from God. It's kind of a currency, it's a coin. That if I give you the coin of fasting God, you're going to give me something. Or it's a kind of bribery that I give you money, God, and you do my bid. But that's not true. Because first of all, Jesus do not say that we should fast because of the reward. He doesn't put the reward as a reason for us to fast. And also, he doesn't say what the reward is. I like this mysterious, type of approach that Jesus sometimes gives us a little bit, but then he covers the other bit, and then we kind of, what? I struggled in the past, but now I'm okay with that. And my take on this, it has to do with recognition. When he talks about not doing it to show people, because if people give us recognition, then we have received our reward in full. But if the Father recognizes us, then he will reward us. So in one sense, the rewards start with recognition. Now you have to choose who you want to recognize your fasting. And I hope it's the second one, which is God's recognition. Now, in my own experience, because the question that comes to mind is, why is fasting a spiritual discipline? What hunger has to do with spirituality? So in my own experience, first of all, the reward that we receive when fasting is self-awareness. Somehow there is a connection between hunger and humility. When you enter in a purposed type of period of fasting, the hunger plays a part in keeping you humble. I don't know why, but it does. And self-awareness, maybe I know why, actually. It's because you see your sin. You see who you are. Somehow, hunger makes you more sensitive or sensible to see things as they are. But also, because it defeats the grasp of the flesh, of your own desires over your soul and heart and mind. The other type of reward I received, I can say, is a renewed awareness of God's presence. Because as you receive awareness or self-awareness of your sin, you end up confessing and asking for forgiveness. And when that happens, then the presence of God also becomes a more powerful reality when you pray and where you are and what, depending on what you're doing. But also a renewed strength to break up old patterns of behavior and a new strength to decide on new habits and new shape, new things to do. It's incredible. And I would like to quote St. Augustine as well on that. He's one of the fathers of the church. And he talking about fasting. He says, fasting cleanses the soul, raises the mind, subjects one's flesh to the spirit, renders the heart contrite and humble, scatters the clouds of concupiscence, which is a desire out of control, quenches the fire of lust, and kindles the true light of chastity. It means that it's a powerful, powerful thing to do when you are praying, when you are seeking God, when you want to be a better person, when you want to conquer things, and so on and so forth. But now, I prepared a little bit of how can I say, practical advices on how to do it. Maybe fasting is a foreign language to you. You've never done it, but it's never late to start. But before I go to the practical prep, it's important that if you are under health conditions or taking heavy medication, it's important to seek advice from a doctor before you start fasting. Okay? But if your health is okay, then first of all, you set up purpose. Why? Why am I going to fast? That is different depending on the seasons of your life. Sometimes, as I said, seeking for answers. Sometimes I'm just fighting sin, habitual sin. Sometimes I'm in trouble. I don't know what to do. You know, I'm about to take life-changing circumstances, so on and so forth. So I need clarity. I need God in my life. I need the Holy Spirit breaking in, you know. So you see the picture. So set the purpose, why? Then set the structure, how and when. It's important for you from the beginning to set up. I'll fast for 3 days. I'm not saying for 72 hours, okay? As I do it is my last meal 8 o'clock and then next meal 12 o'clock p.m. next day. Sometimes if it's a stronger need, it's from 6 p.m. to the other day 6 p.m. That depends on you and what you do, and if you have time also to reserve for prayer. But it's important for you to set the length and how you're going to do it. And then the content. When you go for fasting, it's important to choose what you're going to read. I normally choose a psalm or a gospel or a small booklet or something like that to help me get my mind into the devotional thing. The other thing is to set time apart to pray. If you fast without prayer, you're just going hungry. Yeah, you need to set time for prayer as well. They walk together. As I said, if you don't pray while fasting, you're just being hungry, and it's not going to take effect. So the other thing is reduce distractions. Put away the phone, television, even sometimes friends and family. Set up time and do it. Focus on your search, okay? But now, when to do it? And I'll finish with that. When to do it? As I said already, when going through tough times. Many times in my marriage, for example, when I was going through crisis, I set up time for fasting and prayer because I'm a difficult man. And I know that. And fasting would help me get a softened heart. And it worked. Well, we have to ask my wife as well. But anyway, I think it worked. We are still married. So going through tough times, doesn't matter. I'm just giving an example about marriage, but it can be with kids, with work, with other stuff in life. If it's a tough time, why not set up a time for fasting and prayer? The other thing is when you have to take life-changing decisions. You need clarity. You need a clear mind. That is important to also go through a period of fasting and prayer. The third one is when you're struggling to pray. In our walk with God, sometimes we get in crisis, or sometimes we are too tired. Sometimes we lose the passion, and we need to get back to where we were in our relationship with God. So if you're struggling to pray, to worship, to connect with God in church, then it's a very important thing for you to tackle, And it might be something that happened. It might be that you are holding grudge, you are, not forgiving, you are hurting, and you don't know why. Fasting will help you find out. Will put you, in a direct contact with the Holy Spirit and with yourself, so you can search and see for yourself what is going on. So set up a period of fasting and prayer. But also, if you are already on fire for God and you want more, fasting is also a nice way to say to God, yes, let's go. I'm on fire and I need more. I want more. It's incredible. It keeps you, fresh with God. But then sometimes we find we are so weak that it's difficult to start. So I can tell you, if you're struggling to start, you can ask a friend to join you. We need spiritual friends, people who want to see us seeking God and growing our faith. But we would like also to pray for you. Because sometimes we understand, and Satan also understands the power of fasting. And I've had that many times. Sometimes on a Sunday, I say, God, I'm going to start fasting. Not tomorrow, because tomorrow I have to wake up very early. Let's see, Tuesday because I have that. No, Wednesday, no, because of that. And then I decide to start next week, but then by the time of next week, I just forgot. So my advice is if something is urging in your heart, and if this talk is saying, that's for me, start tomorrow. I mean, tonight, because then your last meal, 8 o'clock, remember? And then, or 6. Don't leave it for the other day, because Satan will do everything he can to put you down. And be prepared, because you find resistance. Every time I start fasting, something happens. Something, when I say in life. But that's not to discourage us. It's just to let you know that keep on, because it is worthy. I believe that the Lord wants to release power to your life. Can we stand and pray?